right, welcome back to Rupert and Pinchy. That crazy guy is George, also known as Rupert, and I'm
Good morning.
Isaiah, also known as Pinchy. If you don't know why we have such weird names, go to our second episode so you can find out. Um, and so the goal here is to aim you to the truth in whatever capacity we can. We have thoughts on our own and a lot of things that we've studied in the past. But if that at all interests you, also let us know your own insights. And that's something that we haven't quite had as much as we would like. So if you can do that, that would be very nice. So today's topic is about new ideas and old ideas, or broadly ideas, just in general, right? But I think that this idea of new and old ideas needs some understanding of what we mean by those things, because new ideas sounds like a nice thing. All right. And old ideas is typically the thought is it's outdated, it's old, because that's the word. But when you think of that, what do you think of? What do you think it denotes?
What old ideas and new
Yeah.
ideas?
How do you think the typical understanding is, or idea that people have when they hear those two terms individually?
Well, when you say old ideas and new ideas, I think the majority is going to look negatively on the old ideas and look more positively on the new
Right.
ideas. And so, right out of the gate, if someone says, "Well, I have an old idea," and someone says, "Well, I have a new idea," who are you going to go with? Right?
Right.
A lot of times. So, you and I talked about before that sometimes, uh, just calling them old and new creates sets up a unspoken parameter already that
Right.
old is bad and new is good.
Why do you think that
So
is? It seems like people have a natural aversion to old ideas for some reason. Is that societal? Is that instinctive? What do you think?
well, I think it's very similar to the son or the daughter thinking they know more than the mom and the dad. And so there's a desire to I think there's a it can be good, it can be bad, but there's a general desire to want to establish your own ideas. So we
Right.
didn't mention that new old ideas and new ideas, my own ideas. But
Right. Find your
so
own path in life.
right, and thinking uh, that wow, look what I've discovered. This is works really well. And then your dad or your mom come along and go like, "Oh, good, you finally got it."
Right. Right.
You finally figured it out. So maybe that's it. Maybe there's just a God has a we're a social being, and yes, we're to interact and not be absolutely independent, but we do have to have a certain level of healthy independence, and maybe that's the driving force. We always want to leave behind what is we've been told and go discover
Right.
it for ourselves.
Well, do you think that this kind of mentality has gone into our institutions or colleges and stuff? I've heard it described as generational snobbery, or basically the intellectual people nowadays, they say uh, all of the people in the past, they were wrong, and so we're bringing the new generation and new ideas and the actual truth instead of the what everybody thought. Oh, everybody thought that the world was flat. Actually, that's a complete lie. But they look at that and they're like, well, they thought it was flat, so clearly they're stupid.
Hmm.
You know, I think that's kind of the same kind of mentality. Would you say that in a
Yeah, and
way?
then yeah. In a side note, the smarter people said, "I really don't care if it's flat. I'm going to enjoy this nice cold beer and time with my family, or this meal or work, and I'm not sure if the world is round or flat. How that's going to change what I'm doing. I'm not going to go to the edge and fall off. But anyway, okay, that's just a side
What
note.
do you mean by that?
Very,
I'm not entirely
very,
sure
huh?
what that meant. What that meant.
Uh, just a side deviation. Okay, so your question was, you mentioned about the generational snobbery.
Yes.
Okay, so um, there's always the tendency for all of us to think that things are really good in the past and things are really bad in the future. As you get older, that's what happens.
Right. Right.
Okay, yeah, and then when you're young, you think, oh, everything's bad in the past and everything's can be fixed in the future.
Do you think that's about
Uh,
experience?
it's about experience, but coming back to snobbery, I think it's been around. Jesus faced that.
Mm.
What's this guy bringing new ideas? Little did they know that he was just expounding on the old ideas, but they they thought, what is this new teaching? So even he faced that generational snobbery
Right.
in a
So do
sense.
you think that happens with every generation? That they typically think that they're smarter than the past people.
Absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah. So
absolutely.
do you think that as you grow older, you learn that you need to depend on other people? That you can't just depend on the new ideas and yourself? Do you think that's part of the experience of
Sure,
aging?
yeah, sure. And in that realm, if you're talking young people, some people are willing to go out and pave the way, as it were, blaze
Mm-hmm.
the trail, and others are a little bit more reserved and held back, or for whatever reason. But yeah, I think that's true.
Right. I'm just considering the one of our concepts in one of the previous videos about pessimism and optimism, about those two types of individuals, and I'm just considering. I think. Do you think it's possible that the more you experience, the more you are likely to be pessimistic, and the less you experience, the more you're likely to be optimistic with how the world will turn out in the future?
Well, I would like to do it from how would people view you? So
Right.
as people are viewing you as you age, they may view you as becoming more pessimistic. Uh, but they may view that you're making your pessimism based on experience,
Right.
and so I don't know if that answers your question
Oh, well,
or
it
where you were
kind of
going.
does. The reason why I went that direction, though, is because it seems like the older you get, the more experience you have because you've lived longer. But you've also realized that not everyone's good and that there's a lot of wickedness out there. And so the reason why I bring that up is just it seems like the older people are more likely to like older ideas, realize that man isn't entirely good or entirely bad necessarily, and that there's a lot of wickedness, and that you've lived a long time, that you've seen more than a lot of young people do. So that's kind of goes back to what you were talking about, them wanting to experience things for themselves. They don't
Yeah, the
really know exactly how the world works until they experience it.
well, and then you also learn that every new idea or every idea, just because your intentions are good, doesn't mean it's going to end up well,
Right.
right? And so you realize that not every idea is good. Going back to your reference to G.K. Chesterton in his book Orthodoxy, when he's talking about the pessimist and optimist, and he came up with he displayed, like we said many times, that why each of those are a bad choice,
Right.
and he came up with the Galactic Patriot as the true choice. And I was thinking, as you were talking there, that if we apply philosophy, which is to understand reality, truth, and knowledge, if we could speak to G.K. Chester and say, "Hey, GK, so if we say that, let's apply the idea of a virtue. So if we say the optimist is an extreme and that's bad, and then we go the pessimist is an extreme, that's bad. So really what he came up with is the mean. He came up with the virtue.
Right,
which
yeah, I think
was,
we pointed that out in that video as well, which I thought
did
was,
we?
yeah,
The
I thought that
Galactic
was pretty
Patriot.
excellent.
Right. And so I think, anyway, so talking about new and old, um, uh, maybe what both new and old, or young and old, or established and newly established, um, what can direct them is the virtue of prudence.
Right, yeah, I mean, when to apply them correctly. It's really what we're
Right.
talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
this actually goes back to one of our previous conversations, not on the channel, but actually about this topic. We're the first time that we considered talking about this. You were talking about that ideas are basically applications of objective reality. Yeah, I mean, like, you recognize that there's some issue to solve, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that in order to do that, we come up with an idea to solve that problem. And so basically, you're applying that reality to be able to fix a problem in a way, or
Mm-hmm.
just trying to find some new application to fix that problem. And so, uh, that is basically what it is when do you apply this idea and that idea? When do you apply old
Mm-hmm.
ideas and new ideas? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of, you always need prudence. We always come back to that.
Right. Well, and so when you were talking about, let me see what you were saying there. Um, the new and the old ideas, and no, go ahead. I
Oh, I didn't know
lost
where I
that
was
thought.
going from now, but
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Go ahead. You'll come
Well,
back.
I have no idea. I wasn't going in a particular direction. I guess um, I I think
Oh,
that.
I know.
Oh, sorry.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. You were talking about ideas. Um,
that's what this is about. Yes.
ideas are a result of a question or a problem.
Right.
Always.
Yeah. So some. Yeah.
Always. And so that's another thing that separates us from the creator. The creator doesn't have ideas because he never faces a problem or a question. He just exists.
So,
So, go
well,
ahead.
what do you so what is it in the creator that he
He's
made
pure
us?
act. He's pure act. And so that would be another. That would be another podcast going into potentiality and actuality.
Oh,
But
right.
he's
So
pure.
you're kind of talking about potentiality
Yeah.
when we're talking
So
about ideas.
he doesn't go like, he didn't create Adam and then go, oh gosh, Adam's alone. I know, I got an idea. So he didn't come with. If you want to say in one way, you could say he is idea. It's always been. So it didn't just occur to him that, oh gosh, we made a mistake.
Right.
Man's alone. But we as humans, our ideas always are generated from a problem or a question. And someone can say, well, a question is a problem. And I would say, yes, but let's think about that for a second. Um, a question like, hey, should I go to the store? Should I wait for till the kids get home because it's not safe here? I got an idea. I'll wait. Okay, that's very simplistic. But if someone says, oh, I wonder why it is the sky is red today. And that's a question, right?
hmm It's not
And
necessarily a
someone,
problem. It's just an
right.
observation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to. That how questions and problems are a little bit different. But someone can come along who's very inquisitive and go like, they'll look at that like that is a problem.
hmm
Why is it red today? And then they'll research it and try to solve that problem.
hmm
And they'll solve it by coming up with ideas of why that is so.
Yeah, and so when I go back to what you're talking about, God not having ideas, I think one thing that you have to establish is that typically ideas have trial and error, right? But God didn't
Right.
have any trial or error when creating the universe. It's not like, oh, let's try
Right.
this great experiment. No, he knew exactly what we needed at the time, everything, and he made it without, um, those problems, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
there were no problems to overcome with ideas. And God also doesn't discover things. So he didn't discover that the universe worked this way. So I think if we use those two criteria that you laid out pretty well, questions and problems, God doesn't have either of those questions or
Right.
problems. So do you think there's any possible thing outside of that that would count as an idea? Or
Well, let's flesh out the Almighty thing first. Go
oh
ahead. You had
yeah,
a
I just have the question. I mean, to give an example like art. I don't think does art try to solve a problem or um we don't
well.
have
It
to go
could
to that
be
right now, but
it could it could be argued that art solves the problem of lack of beauty.
hmm,
So, but when we look at the Creator and we think, okay, you and I posited that, we mentioned potentiality and actuality,
mhm.
and it's understood that God is pure potential and pure actuality at the same time. His act is his will. His will is his act. It's always been. He's always the same. Doesn't change. So and we mentioned that God doesn't go, oh gosh, it's not good for man to be alone. And the father didn't look to the son and said, I thought you were handling the manufacturing of the men. and oh yeah, it just slipped my mind. It would be good for him to no. So and then there's other place in scripture where it says in Genesis where God repented and sorrowed that he created man. You remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
And there's numerous scriptures that would suggest that God changed his mind, or we have to remember words are written for our benefit, for our understanding.
Right. Well, I mean,
God
God doesn't have a hand, and they talk about God's hands, and they talk about
ex-
God's all those God's footstool. I don't think he actually has a footstool, but
right. Well, and that's another perfect example of the words meaning to relate to us as creatures.
right.
Right? He condescends to us. We transcend ourselves by his grace to go to him. But he comes down to our level, and um, when he's speaking in Genesis, there he says he's repented for making man. He can't relate to man his his wholeness for understanding to know why is this happening right now.
Well, just imagine Paul learning for 3 years about God, and then he comes back and he talks about all these things, and everyone's confused. It's because, I mean, there's a lot of things about God and mysteries that we just don't comprehend. And so, if he tried to come to us with his knowledge and understanding, we would not know what he's talking about. You know?
Right. Or we're not equipped. He's bringing us into that, but we're not equipped to understand everything instantaneously at
Right.
all times. And so he is entering into our time, into the physical world, and relating to us. And so that's why it would seem that some might argue, well, see here, God, it seems arbitrary because now he's changing his mind, and it's like, no, this is the scriptures are not written down for God's benefit.
Right, it's
He
for
already
man's benefit.
it's for man to bring us to understanding, just like I wouldn't teach a 5-year-old calculus until they understood the other things first.
Hmm.
And so anyway, uh, what was your follow-up question or thought on that?
Well, before I go into that, let me just
Hmm.
make some clarification just to ask you. Um, is God have any potentiality in him?
Well, he's pure potential.
What's pure potential? Because I don't think I've ever heard him described as that. I've only heard him described as pure actuality, meaning that there's no potentiality in him.
Well, Yeah, I'm saying that he's actuality and potentiality instantaneously. So there's no change. When you think of potential, what you're talking about is potential means there's a change from okay, potentially I'm going to have a cigar this afternoon. That means I have to change from not having one now, which is very sad, to having one later. And and so that's why I say that's why I always use them together, potentiality and actuality, uh, as instantaneous. And so yeah, you could eliminate that word potentiality. It's true.
Yeah, that's what
But
that's all I wanted to clarify because
yeah,
the argument is basically about him being pure actuality, not him being both. Um,
hmm
but that's just a small detail. The other thing that the point that I asked before we went on about God was, what about creativity and art? And you gave it a simple answer, but I think that's a good road to go down upon. So you said that it could be a lack of beauty that you said, or something like that.
right. For a person, they might think, oh, I've got that wall is empty, and it needs something up there. And so um, the simplest form of being an artist is going to the store and buying a piece of art that someone else drew and applying that art to your wall to beautify it because you noticed a certain lack.
Well, don't individuals sometimes just sketch for no reason in particular?
They do, sure.
Right. So I'm not entirely sure what do you call that?
Well, okay, let's go back. Okay, so first of all, that um, uh, seeing the wall empty and going and buying a piece of art, that's an act to beautify that wall. That's an actual artistic move,
Mm-hmm.
even though you didn't do the drawing
Right.
yourself. And so, whereas if you could do the drawing yourself and you're interested in that, you may draw your own painting and put up on the wall. And then your wife will come along and say, I really like that you drew something, but can we take that down? No, but no, but so you come to doodling, uh, and uh, and I guess in what way do you mean doodling? Doodling, you're thinking about, for example, you're thinking about you're going to teach a class in mathematics this afternoon, and you kind of are all prepared, and you're just sitting there, and you got your pen, there's a piece of paper, and you're doodling. Are you talking about that, or are you talking about sitting down thinking, oh, and you just start to
Well,
sketch
I
because
guess let's go down both routes.
okay. So the person that is going to be doing something that afternoon, they're prepared for it and they just have some time to kill and they're sitting there and there happens to be a pen or a pencil and some paper there and he just starts doodling and drawing. Um, that's probably just showing the innate hidden talents that God has placed in all of us
Right.
to create. And obviously, if I was born and I was 20 years of age when I was born, and and I was sitting down with a pencil and paper, I probably wouldn't doodle anything because I haven't had any experience.
Mm.
So, to have any concept of line, circle, draw, uh, wow, let's make balloons, or let's make a picture of my boss's face and have horns on its head, and it's just
Well,
kidding.
those are all
Uh,
ideas, right?
Right. But basically, yeah. So if I'm sitting down sketching, it's showing that my mind has been filled with ideas that I don't even know maybe are there or where. And because of that creative impulse that we have from the creator to be like him, we start to draw.
Mm.
Sometimes even almost unconsciously.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
get that. It's part of the mind process
so
of
then
gathering ideas.
so then you talked about the intentional doodling.
Yeah.
So that's where you get down, and this will draw into your ideas actually. of old and new. So you'll start to draw something because you want to draw something. You don't know for sure what you want to draw. Let's say
Mhm.
maybe you're going to draw a bird. You
Oh,
start,
right. So you want to solve that problem of needing to draw something.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking about
Oh,
yes,
okay.
that too. But I'm starting to draw birds, and I'm drawing all different kinds of wings, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that wing, and all these old ideas end up working toward my finished product, which is my new idea on this final draft. So your dad or people or your sister that you know that are creative, that will they'll doodle, and they might draw 4 or 500 different birds, and then they'll go and draw a more finished product on a canvas, and it will be the finished thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a sense, that's the new idea, and all those other ones were the old ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So, were those old ideas necessary to bring about this new idea?
Right. Yeah. Trial and error is what you're referring to.
Trial and error. Yeah.
Um. Yeah. Sorry. I was.
And so we were talking some time ago. We were talking about how ideas can grow too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to the other side of the continent, and I'm living with my cave woman, wife Olga,
I
and
hope it's a cave woman wife. That would be
yeah,
odd if it wasn't.
yeah, yeah. So common law wife, because we're the only people on the planet apparently. Anyway, so anyway, we want to go to the other side of the continent. So we have the idea. The question comes. Is it a problem or a question? It could be both.
Yeah, it
Hey,
could be either.
it's bad where we're living here. We need to move to the coast. Or I wonder what's on the coast. So so that being a question. So anyway, they go to the coast. Well, the idea is to travel. And so that idea of travel will change over the years,
Mm-hmm.
from foot to horse to cart to car to train to motorcycle to jet plane, perhaps. So the idea grows, but the same problem is creating all these new ideas. So
I do want
so
to go
ideas.
down this road, but
Okay,
I want to go
not yet.
back just a little bit.
Okay,
The reason why is because I was considering something about the creator. So
okay, go ahead.
you were referring to lack, that they realized that there was a lack on the wall. That there could
Hmm.
be some artistic thing to put on there. I have a question. So isn't it considered lack when creation didn't exist? That there was a lack of creation?
Yeah, you could say that.
So couldn't God have the idea of filling that with creation? Or was it
Well,
just inevitable that he would do that? Is that the idea?
no, that's a good question. Okay, so God has no lack. He didn't create us out of any need.
Right.
Um, and so,
Well, need for him, obviously.
need for him. Right. So he wasn't looking at a blank wall and going, "There's a lack."
Right.
Um, but he created uh, creation from the highest to the lowest in a huge spectrum of millions of and millions and millions of diversity and simplicity and complexity all together, and that all added up as a reflection of him. So in one sense, creation is a reflection of him, and because it's a reflection of him, and because creation is not divine, it's not God,
Mm-hmm.
it's always less than God.
Right.
So, but coming back to your question, so did God sense a lack? Again, we come back to the fact that he didn't have an idea. He's pure idea. And so it's hard for us creatures who dwell in time and chronology, of understanding instantaneous truth. And so to God, looking at his creation, it is.
Mm.
He sees it as is. We see it as expanding or decaying or changing but he sees it from beginning to end in one shot, instantaneous shot. So I don't know if that answers your question or that goes the way you, the direction you wanted to go or not. Is it?
Well, yeah, in a way, that's what I was asking. But I also want to go further with what I'm saying because I'm not entirely convinced that God doesn't have ideas. Because if God has an idea, that doesn't mean that there's a change in Him, right? Is that necessary that there be a change in Him if He ever had ideas? Because the same thing I would say is if God has the power to create, that doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
that there was a change in him that he could create. It's that
Right,
he changed something that was outside of him and created it.
right, right. This is a very lengthy
Yeah,
subject,
we can
and
talk about this later. I was just
no, no,
curious.
but no, it's a good subject. There's a couple. Sometimes, okay. There's always a danger when someone says it's complicated. Usually, there's a real simple answer to that
Right,
to it, right?
right.
And then
Many times.
sometimes when someone says that's really simple, usually there's a lot of complicated rationale that goes behind it. So I'm in a paradox. In a sense, that's simple. It would be simple to say God is all knowing, all powerful, omnipresent, omniscient, um, and and so His act of knowing and doing is so beyond our ability to fathom because we work in change constantly, and
Right.
so it's hard to for us to take ourselves out of that kind of thought and put ourselves into the mind of God and kind of how He would do it. Um, uh, One way to say it would be to God, everything's new and everything's old at the same time. To where us,
Right.
uh, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Um, so, so that change, what we consider change is that okay, God created, and we see the world going from beginning to eventually ending, and in the meantime, He sends His Son at it says at the proper time, when the fullness of time, and but he didn't send it Jesus at Moses's time.
Right.
He didn't send it at him at Noah's time. And so for us, it's like we if for us we'd be sitting back if we were the creator because of the way we're thinking. We're setting up our plastic or rubber soldiers in a formation and going, okay, now these soldiers are moving over here. Okay, now this plane is coming. Where God sees that and does that, boom. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like to Him, He sees it all. And so for us, because we're creatures, we experience God's effects in time and through change.
Hmm.
God sees things instantaneously. And so I don't know if that explains it or if that's where you're going on that.
Well, not entirely, but yeah,
Okay.
I get that. Um, we don't have to go down that entire rabbit track because it actually would be a long time, and I think that would be interesting to talk about as a separate subject. So I
Yeah,
think, yeah,
that's a fun discussion. That's one of those discussions that uh, yeah, let's just leave it go. I have too many thoughts. I'll
yeah,
keep going down that. Okay, so you were talking about old and new ideas, and sometimes going back to your very beginning is that uh, why we look at old ideas and think they're obsolete, and we think as new ideas as the thing to do, right?
hmm.
And then we compare the value of the two. So, where do you want to go next on that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there was a track that I did want to go down. I don't know if you actually want to go there,
Okay.
because we you were unsure. So
No, yeah, go. Let's go.
okay, all right, you know what I'm referring to. Okay, um,
The wildebeest. No. Okay.
now just the conservative and liberal mindset
Okay.
of the reason why I want to go down this is not for
No, this is good. Yeah.
right. I want to establish a couple of things first to frame this part of the conversation.
Hmm.
Um, the conservative and liberal ideas or way of looking at the world can affect politics, but I'm not solely referring to politics.
Okay.
I'm referring to conservative in its strictest sense if you look at the word. Conserve, conserve is part of the word. And then we have liberal, which actually the entire word is liberal. Um, but this refers to our tendencies in life. So the conservative tends towards maintaining things or holding those old ideas and saying that, these are the ideas to follow, and they're more prone to look at the world in order, meaning like
Hmm.
they're more analytical typically. The liberal is typically referred to as open minded. It's not strictly like if you're oh goodness, what was I gonna say? So people think that it's better to be open minded than closed minded, and it depends on what we're referring to. The liberal can be open to everything and anything, anything
Hmm.
that's new, any idea, and so it can be unbridled. And the conservative could reject new ideas entirely just because they're new, if they're fully all the way conservative. Like they don't have any liberal side at all. And this goes to how the mind works. I'm not going to discuss how the mind works because I'm not a psychologist, but the reason why I bring this up is because I think it's important to consider the two sides of the mind. The one side that is open to every new idea, and the side that's not as open. And I think that man can
The,
really be
the
split in these ways.
the analytical side versus the creative side. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, yes. Um, I will refer a little bit to how the mind works.
Okay.
Um, the mind, men and women are different. If you don't know that, then you're stupid. Um, or just missing something. Um,
No,
women
you're
are
stupid.
typically more on the liberal side of the brain. The more open minded, uh, you know, ideas, all these creativity side, typically. Men are typically more on the analytical side. So some of these differences do have a biological female male relationship, uh, depending on whose brain you have, whichever brain you have. If you're a man, you have a man brain. I know, I kind of going all over the place. I
No,
want
I like it.
to.
I'm holding back on all my side jokes and slams, but keep going.
um,
So what you're now you're pointing out the difference between conservative and liberal, and I know you don't want to go down the gender. You're just bringing that up, gender differences. You're bringing that up as an analogy. So um, you were
well, not entirely
basically
an analogy. Uh,
okay.
I mean, it's not wholly an analogy. It actually does affect whether or not you're more liberal minded or conservative minded.
Okay.
That's the point I was getting
Uh,
at.
okay. But okay, to visit what you said, so you're saying generally women. Okay, let's uh, briefly define conservative and liberal, and you did that. Or just make a note of how it's defined.
Right. Okay.
When, uh, one thing, if you look in the Webster's or you look online and you ask for the definition of conservative and liberal, chances are all of us are going to say, "Oh yeah, we're definitely liberal," because
Mm-hmm.
what is listed as conservative, you're like, "I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm not that." It almost seems that so we can't just pick our what we are based on what we like
Right.
it's
What we
saying.
like.
We're
Yeah.
yeah. So, but anyway, so let's just do a little bit of contrasting. You know, you mentioned open-minded on the liberal, and it says closed-minded on the conservative. Another place on the liberal it says open-handed,
Mm-hmm.
generous, and on the conservative it says close-handed. You know, and and so there seems I th- so there but there are good points. So let's talk about the closed-minded and open-minded. So hey, the liberal says it's hot. I'd really like to go swimming. Let's just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
And the conservative goes, I'm not swimming. And the liberal's like, why are you so closed-minded? It's nice out, it's hot out, and there's water right there. And the conservative says, I am not going swimming. And the liberal is like, I just don't understand you, you conservatives. You're just closed-minded. And the conservative might reach out and grab him before he jumps in, but then maybe the liberal will go like, okay, so why don't you want to go swimming?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because it's infested with sharks. Don't you see him swimming
Yeah.
around there? You know,
Right. Right.
right? So, so, um, so, so that's an example of where closed-mindedness is not necessarily a bad thing. And then we can reverse that example and show where open-mindedness is like, I won't give that example, but we can just do the opposite and show where sometimes our reservations will keep us from taking a new step that we haven't done before.
Mm.
I've never entered a house through a door. I always go through the window. Yeah, but there's no windows in this house. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure, by the way, why you go through a window. I don't know if you're a thief. It could be that you were born cesarean, and so you tend to not go the right way all the time. But that's a joke, by the way. Do you get it?
No, not really.
Okay, I want you to think on that one. Anyway, and the liberal might say, "There's a door," and the conservative's like, "I don't go through doors. I
Mm-hmm.
just, you know." So we can see that you can go back and forth on that. So, and you mentioned the woman and man. We know that women and men are supposed to be complementary,
Right.
right?
Well,
They're
they
supposed to.
clearly are by nature.
Well, well, yeah. I mean, that's where it works really good. When you work in a complementary fashion rather than a contradictory fashion. Contradictory fashion would be like, I don't think like you, so we're going to only do what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Or and the other side will say, I don't think like you, so we're only going to do what you say. And instead of going like, oh, you like to do this, I like to do that, that fits really well. Let's be complementarians. And so, in a very simplistic way of explaining that. But if you think of liberal and conservative minded, um, I think I was thinking about this last night. It's this in our discussions we were running up to challenges and how we wanted to define or to establish that there are liberals and conservatives. And so as I was thinking, and that person's either a liberal or that person's either conservative, and that may or may not be true, or that person's liberal minded or conservative minded, and that also may be true. But any liberal who doesn't have conservative tendencies is off, and any conservative or any conservative that doesn't have liberal tendencies is a little off. And what do I mean by that? Is that conservatism or conservative or liberalism and liberal, it's not a main virtue. It's a sub virtue to something else.
Mm.
And so what that indicates is that if it's a sub virtue to something else, then we're all to have those sub virtues of liberalism and conservatism within us. We may tend toward one way or the other, but that is where the cardinal virtue of prudence directs. So, for example, in the and prudence is an intellectual virtue, but it's one of the cardinal virtues, which is prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. And so you can find liberality listed under justice. And that makes sense because justice means to give to each one his due. Give our due to God, give our due to our neighbor. And so it makes sense that liberality would be under justice. And so, and anyway, so we all have those, we should have those tendencies in us both. We may lean toward one another, one way or the other, but any habit taken to its extreme without any connection to the others becomes a vice or a problem. And so really what you have is a concern. If you have the conservative who is prudent, that's great. If you have a liberal who's prudent, that's great. Um, it's when you have the imprudent liberal or the imprudent conservative that there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm not.
I
I'm
just
not
thought
sure
of
if that's.
something.
Go ahead.
Oh, so this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I could title it as "Why Men Need Women and Women Need Men," and the reason why I say that is because man typically aims more towards the analytical side. Like I said, is more typically in that direction. And so what I was considering is, what if man goes entirely in the analytical direction? Like he's entirely analytical. He doesn't have any liberal side. I think that leads to a you don't change anything that you ever do. You let's say that I start hitting my head against the wall. I don't stop doing that. I don't think that there's a better way of coming up with an idea or something. Or they are sociopathic, meaning they don't have any kind of emotion. They're only thinking about numbers and what they can do, and it leads to a very bad place when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to man if he has no liberal side at all. But what happens to a woman when she is entirely made up of the emotional liberal side? There's
Mm-hmm.
no concreteness of reality. There's no foundation to keep your feet on, and so you start to go wherever you want at the time. And so, because of those things, I think we're seeing that more and more today. That those two attributes in men and women is that a lot of men are starting to be sociopathic, and many women are becoming less in control of their emotions. And I think that that's the problem with new ideas and old ideas is that new ideas, if unbridled, you're just coming up with a bunch of stuff that none of it makes any sense. None of it is based on concrete reality, and none of it works. And then we have this fixation on old ideas where no new idea is a good idea. If it's new, it's just bad. Um, and so we don't have any prudence on either side. It keeps going more and more to the extremes. I think that that's really points out the dangers of new ideas and old ideas. And how do we fix that? Is by the balance, is by prudence. Do you think that we all need prudence always? I think that's really the biggest thing that we need to actually live virtuous.
It would be prudent to have prudence. The definition of prudence is action based on right reason, and so prudence is kind of the director of the other virtues. You know, uh, justice, temperance, and fortitude. So temperance says, you know, I can handle 3 beers, and that's not in excess.
Right.
Okay, but I'm not going to drink any more than 3 beers. And prudence might overrule that and go like, well, you can do that if you don't drive. So if you have another driver, then then I'm approving your desire to have 3 beers. And this is all happening instantaneously. That's why virtue is described as a habit. We operate on habits.
Hmm.
And so if we're not operating very well, it's because we've developed bad habits.
Right.
And so we talk about prudence directing justice. It's like a person doesn't have a sit down and have a conference with like four of his selves, his prudent self, his justice self, his
Right.
it happens like that. And that's why habits are so important because we make decisions very quickly. So um, I don't know if I got in the weeds on there and that, but you
Not
asked,
really.
should we have prudence? It's like we all operate on prudence or imprudence, one of the two.
Hmm.
It's inescapable, and so yes, we need prudence.
So would you say that
Absolutely.
virtue really doesn't exist without prudence in the man? I mean, in an individual?
Uh, it exists, but it's ineffectual
Mm.
or it's harmful.
So then it wouldn't be virtue.
Well, uh,
Because if the virtue harms you, it's not virtue.
okay. So, but temperance and justice and fortitude. If you're very strong in justice, okay, you have a real strong concept of justice, and so somebody strikes you, and justice demands a response. Okay, and says, "Hey, that person offended me," and the right response is to protect and possibly strike back. Okay, whereas temperance or fortitude might go like, okay, you want to strike back, but you're a scaredy cat.
Well, I have a question. Isn't
Okay,
virtue defined as doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason?
well, virtue is a habit.
Well, is that how it's defined? Because that's how I remember it being defined. Is that a virtue is doing the right thing at the right time at the right for the right reason?
Yes, because it always works through prudence. Whatever virtue you have always goes through the doorway of prudence.
Right. So, but
And
isn't it is it still a virtue if it doesn't have all those three characteristics?
in what way? Right time, right place. It would be imprudent. So,
Well, would it be a virtue still?
well, okay, we make a single act, but a lot of decisions go into place there. Our idea of justice is correct, so that virtue is operating. Our virtue of temperance is intact, and so we're operating that way. But our let's say our virtue of fortitude is not. We're not courageous.
Well,
And
let me make myself a little more clear if I can. Okay.
okay,
If I okay. So is virtue defined as doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason?
a virtuous act is.
So the virtue can be there without the virtuous act. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah. Okay. I get that.
yes. Because of a lack or a weakness in one of the virtues. So you might have the right idea of justice, you might have the right idea of temperance, but in the idea of fortitude, fortitude is the virtue that helps us accomplish the difficult,
Hmm.
or avoid the difficult. Okay, so and so if for some reason I'm not very courageous, I know that I should strike back. Let's say temperance tells me that it wouldn't be unreasonable, or you know, to what degree I strike back. But fortitude is like, I'm afraid, so I don't act,
Right.
because prudence is operating by that information and it happens like that because it's habit. And so anyway, I don't know if that answers your
Okay. Yes.
question.
Yes, that does because you were identifying that it's not the act. I mean, that a virtuous act is doing it at the right time for the right reason. Or goodness, what did I say? Doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. So would you say virtue is the right thing,
Always.
and then prudence is the right time, right?
Uh, yeah. Well,
Or
the right.
right
Yeah,
reason. I know.
the right the right going from potential to actuality. Yeah, the right action.
Okay.
Prudence is the right action. So if someone says that person is prudent, they're making an observation that in general I've observed him operating prudently. Okay, but if someone is observing me in an act or an operation, and someone say what he's doing, he's acting prudently. He sees that going on right then. So it's like he sees prudence in action. But we can say that person tends to be
Hmm.
prudent. But
I
I don't
want to
know if that.
clarify some things before we finish up.
Okay.
What does the liberal need to be better?
Uh, Conservatism.
What does the conservative need?
The liberal.
Right. And so, how would you say in our current climate, um, would you say that liberalism has gone wild?
Um, okay, so stepping out of just our discussion about the general ideas of conservatism, conservative, conservative and liberal, um, is that okay? Now we're talking politics. Uh, so your question being what? Say your question again,
Has
or the
liberalism gone wild? Is what I said. I basically said.
um. Yeah, if I was a prudent liberal, I wouldn't even call those people liberal,
Mm,
right? I would say
right.
no, they reflect bad on us,
Mm,
you know. And so, like you said yesterday or the day before, that Dennis Prager says that leftism and liberalism are not necessarily the same thing,
right. Right.
right?
Even though liberals do tend towards uh, leftism, there's not a direct correlation between liberalism and leftism, and I think that's why he points it out is that there are plenty of good liberals that have a foundation. And do you think that that's when liberalism goes crazy is when it has no foundation?
Right. So prudent action. So a liberal acted prudently. Uh, to act prudently means that your virtues of justice, temperance, and fortitude are their object is the good,
Mm,
based on right reason. Okay, so the object is good, and then we know that the greatest good is God. So in general, when you say that that person is being prudent,
mm-hmm,
it means that their actions are directed to the good. Okay, so when someone says when we say liberalism has gone crazy, or they don't have a foundation, what we could say is they're acting imprudently,
mm,
and we could say the reason they are is because their justice and their temperance and their fortitude are their object is not the good. It's fault. I mean, they think it's good, but it's corrupted. So even a the reason why I say they think it's good, and it's true, um, is philosophically everyone, whatever act a person takes, however good or bad, they're making that action because they think it's going to end up in a good, because they think they're obtaining a good. So we obviously know to hurt another individual, another innocent individual, is not good based on right reason.
mm-hmm.
But for the person inflicting that pain, they're thinking, I'm going to get their wallet. Okay? So they are trying to achieve what they think is a good. Um, and they're using great fortitude because they're courageous, and but they're misusing it for an evil.
Right. So would you say that it's more about what good we're aiming at is
Right.
what separates
Absolutely.
the bad liberal from the good liberal? Um,
Absolutely.
and then I have another question, which I just thought of is: do you think philosophy philosophy's biggest question is, what is the good?
Probably. And what is the good? What? Well, okay. Let's back up. If we think about um, for an individual, the most important questions, and they ebb and flow through a person's life, is who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And
Mm-hmm.
what's my purpose? Four things, and you could elaborate those in different ways and add others. So those are the four things online in life that we are asking those questions. And so those are philosophical
Okay,
questions.
right.
Okay. And then that's in this life. So if we pursue those things um, rightly, according to right reason and natural law, we will become good men.
Right, so those all of those questions refer to the good.
Right. And so then, um, but then you think about, okay, but man, but then the fifth question comes that is what our interest is in this whole podcast is the question, those four questions, and then who made me?
Right, right.
Did somebody make me? Is there a God? Who is he?
Right, well, the
Those are
reason
three
why that
questions.
question comes up is because you look at all these other questions, and the answer is something else. Made me, uh, brought me here, gave me a purpose, all those things. And so you'd be like, well, what is that thing?
Mm-hmm.
What is that thing that answers all these questions at the same time? And that
Mm-hmm.
is a creator. And then we go through who is this creator? He's good, all those things. And I just thought that was an interesting question because I hear the good referred to all the time, and I think that's a question that it seems like many philosophers have really tried to answer. Like that's one of the main things that they've tried to answer is what is the good that every
Mm-hmm.
man aims towards.
Mm-hmm. Well, and okay, so philosophy, um, its two goals is and one. Go ahead.
I just thought of something.
Mm-hmm.
So do ideas go back to trying to discern a good, or not discern a good? Okay. Do all ideas try to pursue the good? Is that man's intention when he comes up with ideas?
Probably.
So do you think that the reason why man has ideas is because he's made to pursue the truth
Right.
and
And
or the
and
good?
that right. And those ideas never change. They don't change.
Right.
Man is the same as he is today as he was 5,000 years ago. The same questions have to be answered. And so, that's why when, Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun, Solomon knew that people used to only ride on horse, and then Solomon knew that someone designed the wheel, and so he knew that there's changes technically or technologically, but he's saying there's nothing new under the sun. The man has the same needs, desires, wants, and he has the same dangers fighting against him for all those things all the time. Nothing's new. It's just I'm going to have an enemy. At one time, it's going to be called the Amalekites. Another time, it's going to be the Canaanites. Another time, it's going to be the Jebusites. And so they may change who they are, but I always have this enemy after me. And yeah,
I think this
ideas
comes
are.
together then,
Go ahead.
full circle with that is so it seems like an idea is trying to solve a problem that is aiming towards a particular good. So we
Hmm.
think, oh, it would be good to go over there. It would be good to draw. It would be good to do this. It would be good um, to be able to go faster. It'd be good. So all this aims at some good that we perceive, and then we try to find how we can achieve that good. And
Hmm.
so this goes to why we're here really is to pursue the good. And
Hmm.
so when we pursue the good, that's when we have okay, when we have the right good, then our ideas will be in step with that.
Hmm.
Typically.
Hmm. Right. So one of the things that I think we need to resist, and I resist, is I don't want to be called a conservative. I don't want to be called a liberal. I just want to be called Rupert. And
Or
then I
George.
want you to, yeah, or George, and I want you to judge me on what I do, and not. The reason
Not
why
as
I
you
say
are.
that, well, the reason why I say that is okay. The reason why I say that is I think it's a false dichotomy, and that's why Dennis Prager says that leftists are not liberals.
Right.
There's a difference. There's a false dichotomy that says I have to either be liberal or conservative. And the reason why I say that's a false premise or a false dichotomy is because within every person, there are liberal tendencies and conservative tendencies. And if we use the term liberal, define the term conservative as cautious, um, and we use the term liberal as open-minded, those two, I want to be both those. And I don't think cautiousness and open-mindedness are in contradiction,
Right.
unless we want to separate them out purely and say you are the open-minded person. That's all you are. You are the cautious person. That's all you are. That's all you are. You're only cautious. You don't have the ability to be open-minded. What I'd rather is be a prudent person. And when I need to do the conservative, take a conservative route, which means to value the old established proven principles and not let those change. But then also realize that maybe I need to go through the door and not the window, or maybe I need to go through the window and not the door this time. And so, and that goes for the liberal person too. But now, when we look on the landscape, like you said, it makes it very difficult to say if someone calls themselves a liberal, conservatives generally like, ugh. And if someone calls themselves a conservative, uh, liberals will tend to go, It's like it's like we've bought into the fact that you have to be either or. Can't you be united and prudential, and then recognize that there is this false liberalism, right?
Hmm.
And go like that is imprudence. Anyway, I don't know if
I
that's
have
where.
2 points left.
Okay.
Okay, so this one that I was just thinking is, okay, I agree that we don't want to label ourselves and then stay that way. What I mean by that is, I think it's helpful to identify which tendency we have, and so that we can balance it. That's the only reason why I think that we should really be
Yeah.
identifying conservatism and liberalism, is to understand how we can improve. Is
Mm-hmm.
ultimately what I want to do when I discover which one I am, and I think it's a good exercise. Okay, which
Mm-hmm.
one do you tend towards? How can you balance it out and be prudent? Is really the question you should ask yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other point I was just thinking is, God is that good that we ultimately are seeking. So God doesn't have an idea of how to pursue the good, because He is the good that we pursue, right? That all
Mm-hmm.
ideas come toward are bringing us to realize that we also have an inner problem, a problem that we realize. Well, what am I? Why am I here? What am I here for? Why do I do what I do? And so we look to God to ultimately answer that. And so I think that part of God not having ideas, or I mean, I don't necessarily know if I'm entirely convinced of that, like I said, but He is that good, that the ultimate good,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
Yep.
sense.
Yeah, it does. And so I think that it used to be that a liberal and conservative, or one party and the other party said, "Hey, we need to build a fence on this property."
Hmm.
Okay, and the argument was, well, um, I think it should be made of cedar, or I think it should be made of stone. So
Hmm.
one
Right.
side would say, I think it needs to be cedar. I think it needs to be stone. They didn't argue the it was already
About the
known
fence. I
and
didn't argue that the fence should exist.
right, right. So so that is where that's where you're talking about the complementarian. That yeah, we tend to okay. I'm kind of the cedar fence guy, or I'm kind of the stone fence guy, and so but we're both fence guys.
Right.
We both recognize that offense, and then the conservatives might say, okay, that fence is going to cost money. We should let's raise revenue by taxing eggs.
Right.
Okay, and the liberal side will say, well, let's tax fuel. And then they argue about where they're going to raise the revenue, and eventually that is concluded by a vote or by agreement or by compromise, right? Okay. However, the liberal today or the leftist today says, let's take and let's say this fence is being built in Portland. The liberalism today will say, let's take the money from the people in Georgia and build that fence. It's like, no, you're stealing to do a good thing. The people in Georgia don't need a fence. They don't need to be taxed for Portland's fence. And so it used to be that you had one side or the other already having the same foundation and prudently operating from their perspectives. And whereas now on the outside, so I agree with you that, yeah, sometimes labels are important, but it doesn't say the whole picture.
Right. Absolutely. And so, in essence, what you were saying is that we originally identified the same problem, and we wanted to solve the same problem. And now we have two different ideas of what kinds of problems there are in the world, in a way, or we have different goals. And that's really where the disconnect is when we have different goals. And many people think that we have the same goals still. That there are liberals that are still reasonable and still have the same goal in mind. But that's really where the disconnect is when we don't even have the same goal.
Or and the imprudent person is operating he's operating poorly. He or she is operating poorly. They're not operating on right reason. So the southern border fence. Why do the conservatives and good liberals want a fence? Because they believe in sovereignty of a nation, not because they dislike poor people from another country
Right.
or immigrants. They believe their first responsibility is to the country, and then you have the leftists who do not want to, the imprudent leftists who do not want to. They don't want a fence. They don't believe in sovereignty of nations, and so their reason is informed poorly, and they're making decisions based on that. So, anyway.
Yeah, I think we kind of went through the avenues pretty well.
Okay.
I think we're
And
yeah.
Good. Well, more power to you.
That's not what you're supposed to say. Have a good week.
Godspeed.
Have a good week.